Hello, everyone, and welcome to High Performing Self-Organizing Accountability Systems Part 2, the Collaborative Accountability System, which, as you can tell from the title, builds on the roles training. My name is Cecile Green, co-founder of Round Sky Solutions and developer of Collab, and I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues Jamie Kearney, Charlotte Root, and Rebecca Fisher-McGinty. Before we go any further, please take a moment to pause the video and grab the operations processing card from the Collab card deck. This will be a helpful visual reference for you during this training. During this training, we'll be covering the following particular points. First of all, starting with a big picture perspective on accountability, what it is, why it matters, especially collaborative accountability. How to implement strong self-managing accountability systems to increase productivity, reduce conflict, and obtain results sooner. And we'll also discuss some concrete ways to enable collaborative accountability, including detailing how to conduct ops reports. We'll also spend some time exploring the importance of personal task tracking as a foundation for effective collaborative accountability, and how it enables all team members to track their work and prioritize reliably in complex operating conditions. And then we'll wrap up with some questions and comments. So thanks for being here. If you've not already watched the Intro to Collab presentation, we recommend you do that because it covers some concepts and terms we'll be using in this training. So as we get rolling here, I wanted to start big on one of the key principles for effective collaborative accountability, namely, use the roles you've collectively created to distribute the power to get projects done, using the autonomy defined in those roles, along with the accountability to report back regularly. These reports really happen in your standard meeting practice for your team and enable a self-organizing team to be collectively or collaboratively accountable, which means you're not relying on a manager to keep track. Each person and the whole team are doing the tracking together. And this enables collaborative power because all of us are accountable to each other, rather than having a bunch of people accountable to one manager who doesn't have to be accountable back to the people they manage. I also wanted to clarify that in this training, we're using the term accountability specifically in the context of a work environment. The accountability that groups with privilege have to those with less is an important use of the term, but is beyond the scope of this training. What we have discovered, however, through application of Collab in work environments is that it establishes new norms for the use of power and accountability that are generative, where the systems we are using together reliably deliver shared power and shared accountability in action on a daily basis. But before we go much further, I wanted to ask, what is accountability? One definition that I found is an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to take account for one's actions. In conventional management, accountability is really achieved through the use of managers who create our job descriptions and to whom we directly report, often in one-on-one settings. And in order to get any work done as a team, we really must be willing to share accountability between us somehow, whether by a manager or by some other mechanism. Otherwise, the potential is that nothing gets done, or maybe nothing gets done well, or maybe nothing gets done according to the plans we've all decided on. I'm curious to hear from you all. Can you share any of your experiences of how accountability or lack of accountability impacted organizations you've been a part of?
Sure, I'll start. So accountability comes up a lot in my organizing world, and it comes up in terms of, like you said, that's not in the scope, is with other groups who we're accountable to, but also how are we accountable to each other? And something that I realized is that without a clear system or roles, it feels really awkward to figure out what accountability looks like for us. Yeah. And often, because there's a lack of that, it's really awkward when someone doesn't do something because we're not sure how to keep them accountable. And so what I've done, maybe not the right thing, is to just do what other people said they were going to do instead of asking them. So that is part of how accountability has showed up in my life.
Thank you, Rebecca. How about you, Jamie?
For me, I sort of define accountability as clarity about what I've committed to. and what other people have committed to. You know, I think where that can be especially difficult when that's not clearly mapped out is when a manager or someone else in a, you know, position of power and getting things done has some big assumptions about what they're committed to or what other people are committed to, and they don't have to get clearer on it, and they don't have to communicate clearly about that. Because what I've experienced happening then is people drop the ball and there isn't like a sense of how did this happen, and that, you know, just being clear on who's committed to what when really eliminates a lot of unnecessary stress.
Yeah, that's so true. Thanks, Jamie. Oh, Charlotte.
Yeah, actually, I've had that experience even with the traditional top-down management structures. In my experience, there was a time where no one was sure who was supposed to be doing the work and who to go to when they had a question about a project, and the ambiguity that was there caused a bunch of frustration for everyone, and then everyone ended up just feeling really unmotivated to complete the project and discouraged, and there was just a lack of clarity and sense of teamwork. Yeah,
so true. One of the most common mistakes we see in self-organizing teams is to kind of assume that being self-organizing means that we can all do whatever it is that we individually think is needed. And while there is some truth to this assumption, the problem is that the benefits of autonomy are often lost in the inevitable conflicts that emerge from not holding ourselves accountable to the team's mutually agreed upon plan. Accountability really only works, as some of you have said, when the boundaries of our obligations to the team are clear and we have a regular time to report on our progress. In collaborative environments, that reporting can be done by a team reporting process instead of solely relying on a manager or the lack thereof. But when accountability practices are thrown out of the window entirely as instruments of oppression or maybe a waste of time, self-organizing teams really suffer, as we've all just heard and experienced. And some of these same patterns hold true in top-down environments, often due to some of the same mistakes, which is lack of clarity around who's doing what and lack of clear opportunities to report and be accountable back transparently to our team in a variety of ways. So these simple accountability practices will teach you are not only liberating and time-saving, they are the key to making self-organizing teamwork possible, and really any teamwork at all. So why is collaborative accountability important? And really, now that we have a shared understanding of what accountability is, I wanted to hear a bit more from all of you. Why would being collaboratively accountable to each other be important?
Well, for me, with a bunch of motivated people on a team, I've had the experience that sometimes it's hard to get clear about who's actually responsible for what tasks and projects. And, it's helpful to know who to go to when we have questions or suggestions, and how to feel really confident that the work we all consider important, that we're investing our time in, is still being held by the whole team, even when we're off doing our little bits of work.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Charlotte. How about you, Rebecca?
I see collaborative accountability as a tool, really, to address structural power dynamics that show up in our work, even if we don't know that it's showing up. For example, in fighting the systems of patriarchy and ableism and white supremacy. What I've noticed in my organizing work is that some individuals are socialized to take on behind-the-scenes tasks, like me, maintaining websites or databases or coordinating food or childcare for meetings, and that becomes invisible or overshadowed by more glamorous outward-facing tasks like teaching or meeting with clients or going to actions if we're talking about the same meetings. And often with these implicit roles, we assume can be connected to our gender, race, cultural background, education level, or other identities. And I think that systems of collaborative accountability give an opportunity for all the work to be known and appreciated in a team and visibilized.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful move, even just making all those things explicit. Thank you, Rebecca. How about you, Jamie? What's your experience?
I think for me, there are like a few fundamental areas that change whether or not there's good collaborative accountability. And the first one just is in the like physical stuff that gets done. If we're doing something on a really small scale, I think a lot of us can get in this rhythm of, well, I just have to do this, this, and this. But I think inevitably, if something's really important, it's going to naturally grow. And when it starts to grow, I think that's when a lot of businesses, organizations, or individuals kind of spin out. Once the stuff they have to do goes beyond what they can keep track of in their mind. And being able to track it in a clear system makes a huge difference. I would say the other two areas are just like mentally and emotionally. There's this, once we're handling a lot of stuff and we have to spin a lot of plates, there's this continuous behind the scenes stress of what am I doing exactly? Where is this thing? The stress of trying to keep track and not really knowing what we're doing, that again clears up pretty quickly. Even if it's like, okay, I don't have the time to do this now, but I know that I need to do it. And I know where to go to find out that I need to do it.
Yeah.
And then the biggest, element of the collaborative piece is just the interpersonal piece, right? Where I'll go from personal experience and saying, when I didn't have a well-established system, I let a lot of people down for the first two reasons I mentioned. Stuff fell through the cracks, and then I was stressed out, and then I can't be available to people that I've made commitments to. So, it's been enormously important in my own life and the people that I've worked with.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, those are all such fantastic examples of why collaborative accountability really matters. And, in particular, in self-organizing teams, being able to actualize collaborative accountability by including and transcending the role of the manager enables us to realize the benefit behind our impulse to have autonomy over what we do with our time. And that benefit is intrinsic motivation. And just to talk a little bit about it, intrinsic motivation kind of lies on a spectrum with extrinsic motivation. The first, intrinsic motivation, refers to a source of internal motivation, such as the autonomy to set one's own schedule. And the farther end of the spectrum, extrinsic motivation, refers to the motivation driven by external forces, such as how much I'm paid for my work. And on the whole, with exceptions, of course, intrinsic motivation is far more powerful motivator than extrinsic motivation, producing an increase in individual creativity, innovation, engagement, endurance, and productivity. And it feels better, honestly. So enacting this kind of clear, collaborative accountability system can be both exciting and uncomfortable. Frankly, it's a transition from what most of us have experienced. And it can be really energizing and motivating to see all the work that's happening in a team, to know what's really mine, as Jamie was saying, to know where the boundaries are, and even if I can't get it done, to be able to have that be transparent. And at the same time, some of us tend to not speak up much about the work we're doing, and the act of reporting brings everything out in the light for all to see. And the key to remember here is that with some practice, this all begins to feel quite normal and resolves a lot of problems, while simultaneously building a culture of support and appreciation, as well as making progress towards mutually agreed upon goals and driving productivity when we can see what our goals are and keep those in mind at the same time. So any questions from you all at this point?
I have a question. I'm still wondering about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. It seems like in most teams, both are present. For example, the intrinsic motivation to work according to my own schedule and feel passionate about the purpose of my work. And at the same time, extrinsic motivators like wanting to follow through on commitments to my team and coworkers, or to create a stable livelihood for myself and my coworkers. Is this right, or that both can be present and useful?
Absolutely. They both kind of co-arise at the same time. They're both always present. It's not like we can have one and not the other. They're both there and both useful. And it's really just a question of how we kind of make both of those work best for us and our teams in any given situation. And what tends to often happen is the especially in conventional management situations, is that extrinsic motivation is overused while intrinsic motivation is underused. And so ideally, we want to have both leveraged.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So I think a question naturally comes up next is, how does Collab really support collaborative accountability and enable joyful and supportive work together? And we've designed a number of mechanisms to accomplish this effectively. And we'll be going into detail on some of these key points, but I wanted to do an overview of what the comprehensive system is. And beginning with the practice of creating clear roles with concrete accountabilities that shape specific recurring tasks along with projects and metrics. This really means that once you have your roles and accountabilities clear, your projects, the work that you do, aligns within those roles. Those roles really give you the passport, the authority, the autonomy to go out and get that work done. And that work is kind of put into these buckets of recurring tasks and projects and metrics. Second point is the use of ops reports, where we report on these recurring tasks, projects, metrics, and scopes, which we're going to detail in a few minutes for you, like how to do that ops report. These same ops reports generate tensions. And those tensions become agenda items, which are then processed to new strategy, new roles, accountabilities, and or new projects and next actions. These projects and next actions then go back to be tracked by the individual in a task tracking system that is transparently shared by the whole team. And these individuals identify their projects' next actions based on the team's mutually agreed upon strategy. So essentially, our team strategy, which we come up with together, is a piece of work that I reference every time I pick a project so that I know I'm picking what's in line with that strategy. And finally, performance reviews and role elections, which are conducted regularly, can be linked to pay and professional development plans. So with these 8 steps, the experience of anything falling through the cracks will be taken care of. And these are what we recommend and provide the tools and support for self-organizing teams to implement a collaborative accountability system. So I'd love to hear from those of you in RoundSky. Could you give an example of a role and accountability you hold and how this generates your projects and next actions in support of being collaboratively accountable?
Yeah, sure. For example, I hold the role of service scope lead. So as the service scope lead, it's my responsibility to make sure that the work we're doing in the service scope lines up with our strategic priorities within that scope, and that our strategic priorities are designed to deliver on the work that's needed to fulfill the larger scope strategy. So I work with service scope members all the time to make sure that this is happening. And when there's a job that needs doing in the service scope that's not being picked up, it's in my accountabilities to pick that job up until we can have a role election. So that happens sometimes too.
Thank you. Oh, that's a great example. How about from you, Rebecca?
Absolutely. So I hold the role of design and branding lead and also the website content manager. And with those 2 roles, I'm in charge of monitoring our branding upgrades or proposing changes, and also making decisions on our website layouts, and while also inputting that content into the layout, into the website. So often my projects are generated around crafting content for the website or updating it, as well as uploading that content. And I think in terms of how that supports collaborative accountability is that people are often waiting to do something, waiting to outreach to tell their client that we have this great resource on our website. So our system allows them to know what I'm up to and what I'm doing so that they can have a timeline to do that. So I think that's where it's really been useful for me in terms of generating my projects and staying in communication with my team.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's great. Okay, I think we're ready to do ops reports and kind of demonstrate how these really work for you. These happen during the standard meeting practice. And they really are the biggest and most basic opportunity for us as a team to sync up around our specific projects and actions through a concise report from each team member on their recurring tasks, projects, metrics, and related scopes. And this is most effectively done while referencing the ops tracker, which you will find access to in the course portal. You can use any other project management system you'd like, but please do check out the ops tracker so you'll know the basics of what's really needed for comprehensive collaborative ops reports. And do remember, all the details of how you need to do this are on the Collab cards, so feel free to reference those as well. What I'll do now is kind of describe the oral reporting format conducted while looking at the ops reports, and then we're going to do a demo for you. One alternative to an oral report is a written ops report, which can be better for some teams. It takes more time to actually write everything out, but it's time outside of meetings. So if your meeting time is super precious, you should consider a written ops report as a way of going about this. And you should determine which approach is really best for your team through integrative consent in a standard meeting practice. So during the ops reports, the facilitator, scribe, and scope members all have different jobs to do. So I'll start first with introducing what the facilitator is doing. So the facilitator leads each scope member one at a time through the process of reporting succinctly on all the recurring tasks, projects, and metrics, and scope reports if they are a scope rep. Scope members are each looking at and following along with the updates by viewing the ops tracker. They'll need to be taking notes if needed for appreciations, helpful suggestions, and tensions that may arise. And when invited by the facilitator, each scope member reports on their work without interruptions as follows. For your recurring tasks, you would read aloud your recurring task title, followed by done or not needed. For your projects, you would read aloud the title of your project, followed by a brief summary of what you've concretely done since we last met, what you intend to do going forward. Repeat this with all of your active projects, excluding backlogged projects. Metrics, if you have been assigned any, we want you to present your data concisely along with your conclusions, if any, preferably both in written and oral form. And for scope reports, if you are a scope rep, we'd like a high-level 1 to 2 minute summary on the health of your scope for which you are reporting. And last but not least, occasionally there are other updates. For example, maybe you went to a conference and you want to provide a succinct update on how the conference went, any main highlights. And when each scope member is done, the facilitator prompts for questions, comments, and appreciations from the rest of the team. These also should be done concisely. During the ops reports, the scribe will mostly be participating as a scope member, meaning they'll be listening to the reports of others and giving their own report as well. However, if any next action or agenda item comes out of these conversations, the scribe will record it on the living agenda. When ops reports are complete, we should have a clear understanding of where our teammates are at and what they plan to do until next meeting. And this provides the basis for successful collaborative operating and really ensures that we all feel aligned with our team's strategic initiatives. Practicing these ops reports regularly will enable more collective visibility, increased productivity, it will strengthen project prioritization, and increase appreciation for teammates and work provided. It will also provide realignment as needed. So any questions from you all at this time?
Yes, actually, I have a question. I'm basically wondering, what level of tasks need to be reported on at any given time? Because I would imagine it could take a while if we have to review every single small task that people have committed to or are taking on, in some contexts where we only have a little bit of time. And there might be other times where we want to go more in depth. And I'm kind of wondering, is there a way to scale this process so that we can be flexible depending on the time and energy we have as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great question, Jamie. And honestly, in order to be concise, which is very important during ops tracking, because it could take up your entire meeting time if it was if we go into too much detail. The key is to report at the project level, and projects have many, many, many next actions. And so we don't actually want to hear about that email you sent to John or the phone call you placed to Jane around your project of getting, let's just say, the website updated. What we want to hear is website updated. Since we last met, I got all the new templates into the website and I worked out some technical details with our vendors. Going forward, I'm going to complete the work of getting our new pages in there and I'll write some new copy. So you can see that there's a lot of next actions kind of wrapped in there that we're not hearing any of the detail on, but we are getting the gist of what, let's say we'll use Rebecca in this case, what Rebecca might have done in terms of updating the website and what she plans to do going forward. Did that answer your question, Jamie?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's do a quick model of an ops report. And Charlotte, would you be willing to demonstrate using some examples from your work?
Sure. As you can see here, this is just an example of some of my ops tracker. It's just a compacted version here. So I'll just go through the ops report. So preparing for meetings, check. Attending meetings, check. Email inbox 0, not check. Updating ops tracking doc, check. The first project is performance review process developed and shepherded. What I've done on this in the last week is I've generated a document that has a beginning process laid out. And moving forward, I'm going to be asking my teammates for feedback on the copy that I've generated. Purpose, brainstormed, and themed. This is a T3 for me, and my goal here is to complete the process of brainstorming that I started last week and start to put together the brainstorming that I did into succinct themes. Personal development, reflection, homework done. So in the past week, I've been working on my personal development practices, and I have a project to do some journaling on that. And I've done one journal entry. My goal is to have 2 more journal entries done by next week. Client served, this is a T1 for me, so this is my #1 priority. I have spent a bunch of time on this in the past week with various clients, and moving forward, I expect that that will wind down a little bit throughout the ending part of this week, so I'll have a little bit more time to work on other projects. And task tracking blog post completed. In the past week, I've laid out the general outline for the task tracking blog post and conducted an interview with a partner organization. And moving forward, I'd like to continue to produce copy for the blog post and edit that interview so it can be published. One of the metrics that I'm tracking is the clients I'm serving. Last time we checked in, which was a month ago, I had 7 clients, and now I have 9 clients. And the service scope report is something that I am responsible for delivering, and the service scope is working on a lot of client delivery work right now. That's #1 for us. And the #2 project we're working on is developing an app to display the work that collaborative accountability does within a team. And moving forward, that's going to be taking up a lot of our time. So that's what we're planning on focusing on in the next month. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I really appreciate that. And if this were an actual standard meeting practice, I would then invite both Rebecca and myself as your teammates to offer our questions, comments, and appreciations succinctly. And then we would be done with you and move on to the next person. During that time, if any agenda items came up, and agenda items being tensions, something that we want to discuss more in depth, those would go on the agenda. We would not get into them during ops reports. All right. Well, I would like to take a few minutes before we wrap up to comment on the importance of the individual task tracking system. We've mentioned it a few times during this call. And it's really critical in our current age, essentially because the human brain was not built to retain the number and the pace of details we encounter in our day-to-day work and life. And attempting to hold all of the details of a complex and fast-moving life ties up a part of our brains, which is then not available for delivering on our tasks. and it produces a sense of overwhelm, kind of chronic overwhelm. So having an effective task tracking system really takes some pressure off our brains for doing a task it was not built to do, which frees up more attention and creativity. In addition, really the risk of forgetting or accidentally dropping some important item increases exponentially the more complex and the faster the pace of our work. And in a team environment, having the individual task tracking creates systemic trust, which then allows for relational trust between people to build. The ops report is a simple project management framework that really relies on each individual having their own system for tracking all next actions that go on to delivering on our projects. And without a trustable system, it's really not realistic to expect trust between team members with wide-ranging capacities for tracking and sorting tasks into what's important and what's not, and then for getting those tasks done in a timely and productive manner. So tracking our tasks also strategically enables us to prioritize on a daily, even hourly basis. Without this externalized records of our commitments, overcommitting and under-delivering really is to be expected. I'd like to hear from each of you. Can you speak a little bit about your own individual task tracking system and how it supports your ability to be accountable? And feel free to share ways in which your system is not working or could be improved as well.
Great, I'll start. On a simple level, as you said, it helps me remember what I've decided to take on, which for some reason is not easy to remember in my brain. And it also helps me to be clear with my team about what my priorities are this week. Like Charlotte so beautifully laid out, these different targets that she'll get done this week is, I think, really important because this practice forces me to think about what I actually have time for and to be honest with my team about what I can make happen out of my many tasks this week so they can depend on me for those things. And I think that the task tracking process then acts also as a time tracking process, like a time management process in a way. So that's something that I've really learned through this specific task tracking.
Nice. Thank you, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Jamie?
You know, I would say that the experience I most want to have is like that place where what inspires us is just pouring out. And the paradox is if we're not nourishing the kind of systems and specific details and stuff that attending to, for me at least, doesn't feel like creative flow at all. It feels like, oh, I got to deal with these down to earth kind of basic things. But the creative flow starts to disappear because that's what feeds it. That's what nourishes it. And so that's been the biggest thing of getting a solid task tracking system in place is I realized that by taking the time to deal with these kind of basic fundamental things, it frees me up so much more.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say as far as the actual system goes, for me, I think it's always going to be a work in progress, but it really needs two things. I need to have a good system where I'm capturing everything or as close to everything as possible so that I'm not toggling between what I have explicitly down and like these other ideas I have. So it really, like you demonstrated, Charlotte, is kind of, it needs to be elegant and clear and laid out. But the other piece is a personal development piece where I have to really develop the habit to attend to it every day and every week and make that a part of my life, make that a muscle that's active, because I can have the best system in the world. And if I'm not like working with it on a daily basis, it just falls apart, which it has several times. So that's a lot of the process is coming back to it and refining it and just getting to the point where it's a natural extension of who I am and what I do to attend to that system.
Nice. Thank you, Jamie. How about you, Charlotte?
Yeah, so in addition to the ops tracker that I just demonstrated for you all, I also use my calendar really often to remind myself of daily tasks and scheduled times like meetings and deadlines. So I put all of that into my calendar so that reminds me automatically. And then I have a separate list on my iPhone actually of the smaller tasks and little reminders that I need to keep track of, everything that kind of comes into me on a daily basis that I need to keep track of. and often input those as notes into the ops tracking doc to help keep me on track with the projects that I have listed there.
Nice, thank you. Those are all great examples. And ideally, our individual task tracking system is something that is transparent to our whole team. So that's something to shoot for if that's an option for you and your team. As we wrap up here, I wanted to emphasize that creating a strong self-managing accountability system has the following benefits. It increases productivity, it really reduces conflict, and distributes workloads, while helping us to retain results sooner with less frustration, and really enables us to manage rapidly changing conditions with more grace. We also get happier, more creative people because it enables us to all have the power, the autonomy, and the accountability to get our work done. And one of the simplest ways to do this is through the ops reports format of the standard meeting practice, where you have a built-in and neutral mechanism for safe, effective, collaborative feedback to keep your team aligned and highly productive. I'd like to open it up for the group for any final questions.
I have a question. I'm curious how we make sure that our tasks in the ops tracker are aligned with the strategic initiatives of the group that we're part of. And the whole team has chosen. How do we set those up?
Yeah, so the ops tracker that the Charlotte was just reporting off of has a column to indicate strategic priority. So the targets that you saw on there and that we referenced are how we each individually first choose which of our major projects are gonna get our attention this week. And typically we recommend limiting your targets to 5. And this is really important because it's so easy to to try to take on more than is realistically possible. And so indicating on your ops report what your targets are, numbering those targets 1 through 5, then when we report, we can see, are you aligned with our strategic priorities or not? And if not, during my questions and comments, I'm going to say that. I'm going to say, hey, this project doesn't look like it's aligned with our strategic priorities. Why have you chosen that? Or I'd like to see this other project as a target instead.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm really curious, Cecile, whether individual task tracking is so important, and I feel like we could probably do a whole other training on it, or more, a whole month-long training. But I'm just wondering if there's any more resources that RoundSky has available to those who are interested in learning more about the individual task tracking practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a fantastic task tracking blog, which you wrote, Charlotte, and that's right on our website. Feel free to check it out. It's got a lot of great juicy details. And in addition, I will also recommend David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. The GTD system is a system that Collab has integrated in terms of how we think about and frame task tracking. Did you have any other resources in mind, Charlotte?
Yeah, that sounds great. I actually watched a bunch of YouTube videos that relate to David Allen's Getting Things Done, which were really helpful to me.
Nice, thank you.
I'm also curious about, we mentioned the interpersonal a little bit earlier, and I'm curious about how frustration or different feelings that may arise get processed. For example, if a team member has a pattern of not completing certain tasks and it impacts my work or their team's goals, what would you suggest? What happens? How do you process that?
Yeah, fantastic question. And it happens to all of us from time to time. So there's several mechanisms in here that help with that. First of all, the act of reporting tends to drive people to get their work done, but that doesn't cover everything. Sometimes things still don't get done. But during that act of reporting, I get to hear that things aren't happening, and that raises attention for me, which I can then put on the agenda for processing. When we get to that agenda, there are a number of ways we could process it. One is through an interpersonal tension clearing process, which is where I would get a chance to share how my teammates' actions have impacted me. And we go through a structured process for restoring relationship there, restoring trust essentially between two people, essentially on an emotional level. And again, that is a partial solution. It is not a complete solution. next item, the next way in which we could address this would also be to assign or request a personal development practice that an individual could take on so that they could address whatever is in their way of getting their work done. And we have performance reviews. Those regularly conducted enable all of us to weigh in on how a team member is performing. If this is a recurring pattern, that will show up on their performance review. And we recommend linking performance review to pay. And that also then has a consequence built in. And the fourth mechanism really is a new role election. Perhaps it's just a bad role to soul fit for this individual, and we really need to find someone else to take the role on. So those are a number of mechanisms for kind of addressing this frustration, and fundamentally the way in which, if work is not consistently getting done, it is derailing for a team. Did that answer your question?
It did, and it brought up another question. Can I ask another?
Yeah.
So something I'm remembering that people often ask me once I've told them about some of our interpersonal tension clearing processes or these report backs is their comment is, oh, that sounds terrible. I would never want to put myself through that process because of a real anxiety, because of the feeling of being put on the spot. What do you have thoughts on that you'd like to share? Because it is a really vulnerable process to do that.
And just to clarify, you mentioned two things. One is just the process of reporting is a vulnerable thing, right? To reveal what have I done, what have I not done, right? And then there's also the process of going through interpersonal tension clearing, which also is a moment of being like, wow, someone's upset with me. Like, that's awkward. Was it both of those you wanted to hear about?
Sure. Yeah. Those general vulnerable experiences. Like, what are your thoughts around that? How do people get past that in some way?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is that it really helps a lot that everyone on the team is doing it. No one is singled out. No one gets to not do it. And so we're kind of all in it together. And sort of sharing that vulnerability does make it safer all the way around. The second thing is that we are specifically prompting for appreciations after each person goes. And that typically actually in practice tends to be the highlight of those questions, comments, and appreciations, is hearing how people appreciate what you have done. And so honestly, in action, what I see happening is that the ops reports, while they are a vulnerable place, they tend to build a lot of relationship because we're getting appreciation back for the work that we have done. And any of the feedback we have for what's not going well has a safe way in which to be addressed, which typically comes out in comments like, hey, that project looks like it should be a higher priority for you. What's in your way? How can I support you? So that's what happens in action. And yes, the first few times through, it can feel a little awkward and scary. But again, as a practice, once you get used to it, it's very powerful and actually generates a lot of safety and support. And then to the interpersonal tension clearing, similar comments. Again, we're all kind of on the hot seat, and the ability to get an emotional issue surfaced and processed in a way that's safe. So at the end of the process, we are left with restored relationship. And even that experience of kind of being on the hot seat, once we're kind of through those steps, is a feeling of connectivity and support that comes out at the end. And so there's a bit of a leap of faith to kind of try these things out and see how they work, and give them some opportunities to kind of work their magic in your team. Did that answer your question?
Those are great points. You're totally right. Thank you for laying that out.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I won't pretend that it's easy. You know, there is an adjustment period to get used to these new ways of being together, but they well outweigh the stress of what we normally experience when we don't have effective collaborative accountability systems. Well, thank you, everyone. Those were fantastic questions and comments. And As we wrap up here, I just wanted to thank you for watching this training, and remember that it is one of several trainings in the series. So please do check out the other related trainings on integrative consent, on the standard meeting practice, on roles, on being a scribe. And please do reach out with any of your questions, share your experiences, and comment on the forums. Thank you so much. Bye.